Hello YouTube, and welcome to my channel. My name is Benedict the 17th, and I've been wanting to make this video for quite a while. Essentially, I'm going to present a system that seeks to explain, well, everything according to a masculine-feminine binary. I think that by understanding masculinity and femininity as universal categories, we can make sense of a lot of biology, psychology, theology, and perhaps even physics. I've been sitting on this video for a while because I was trying to decide if I had enough material to move forward with it or if I wanted more evidence. But I recently stumbled across a video by DrRandomercam from 2016 called An Ought from an Ism. I'll leave a link to it in the description along with some of the other resources I looked into for this video. His concern so struck me both out of empathy, but also because I think he touched on some of the thoughts I will be sharing in here. So I really want to thank him for being an impetus to this video, although he might not agree with some of the conclusions I've reached in it. Whether he does or not, I would be interested in hearing his thoughts, and I hope he and others understand that what I am saying is not meant to be an attack, but an honest inquiry into these topics. And if I overstep a line, I apologize. Anyway, I want to begin by noting that this video is not like most of my other videos, where I try to start from a universally agreed upon premise to try to force a certain conclusion. Frankly, if I were going to do this that way, it would take way too long just to build up the premises, let alone the argument itself. And I'm not sure some of the things I'm going to say can be proven. So instead, I'm going to present my conclusions as they are, give some background, and where appropriate, give some evidence. I just wanted to say that all up front because I'd rather people came into this video with the expectation that this is a brainstorming session more than a full-fledged argument. I'm not saying I don't want to hear criticism, by all means I do, but I don't want people to waste their time trying to pick apart what I'm saying on technicalities because, and I can't stress this enough, this is not an argument. With that out of the way, let's begin with a quote from C.S. Lewis that distinguishes sex and gender in the manner I wish to distinguish it. Gender is a reality and a more fundamental reality than sex. Sex is, in fact, merely the adaptation to organic life of a fundamental polarity which divides all created beings. Female sex is simply one of those things which has a feminine gender. There are many other things, and masculine and feminine meet us on planes of reality where male and female would be simply meaningless. The male and female of organic creatures are rather faint and blurred reflections of masculine and feminine. Their reproductive functions, their difference in shape and size, partly exhibit, partly also confuse and misrepresent the real polarity. C.S. Lewis's Perelandra. This quote nails one of the fundamental points I want to make, that masculinity and femininity are not derived from the male and female sexes. Rather, the male and female sexes are simply manifestations of a higher duality in nature, the masculine and feminine. What exactly are the masculine and feminine? I'm not exactly sure myself, but for lack of a better word, let's call them energies. As a religious man, I would say that these two energies represent the creating and nurturing energies of God with which He makes and sustains the world in being. Now, while I think it's easier to understand what I'm going to say if one has a theocentric worldview, I don't think it's necessary. I think we can see these two energies at play on lots of different levels. The most obvious is the biological difference between male and female, but we can also look to the material level. For example, remember this tweet? Many responders immediately saw the issue with this virtue signaling campaign, that in fact only the last of the three options work. Airline seatbelts are designed to work with a male tongue and female buckle. You need one of each, and having two that are the same simply doesn't work. This fundamental binary exists beyond seatbelt buckles. In construction, you have male bolts and female nuts. Electricians can refer to plugs as male and sockets as female. Even in plumbing, you can have male pipes and female receivers. The Talmud even refers to arrowheads as male and the shaft as female. Male and female are universal categories of which the human sexes are just one instance. Even if we didn't call them male and female, tools and technologies like the ones described require an insertive part and a receptive part to work. It is these complementary roles of initiation and reception that I mean when I refer to the universal male-female dichotomy. Furthermore, although they aren't given the names male and female, other similar binaries exist on a more fundamental level, like mass and energy or the two poles of a magnet. What are these two energies like? Well, I think the following are approximations. First, masculinity is outer-directed, femininity is inner-directed. Masculinity looks outward, trying to make sense of the world and order it. Femininity looks inward, seeking harmony within oneself. Biologically, this is reflected in men's greater capacity, in general, for spatial reasoning and increased physical strength. In women, better emotional and communicative reasoning and the capacity to bear life. Second, masculinity is initiative, femininity is responsive. Masculine drive is what drives us to do things. The feminine drive is what drives us to sustain things. Masculinity is oriented towards action. Femininity is ordered towards being. Biologically, this is seen in the sexual act. The man enters the woman. The woman receives him. Man is the creator of life. Woman the nurturer. Third, masculinity is based in objectivity. Femininity is based in subjectivity. Essentially, masculinity wants to see the world as it really is. The masculine impulse is to try to escape our own subjectivity into some imagined neutral perspective. The feminine impulse is to try to understand the world through the subjectivity of others. Essentially, femininity finds its truth in the dialogue of multiple perspectives. Masculinity finds its truth in trying to avoid any perspectives. Fourth, masculine physicality is enveloping. Feminine physicality is supportive. By this I mean that when men seek to demonstrate physical affection to each other, there's often a little bit of power dynamic implied. When women seek to show physical affection towards each other, it's on much more even terms. Think about the way men and women hug. Men will squeeze each other hard, one arm between the other guy's shoulder and neck. Women will go for the back and upper waist in a show of support. Another important thing about them is that they are ordered towards each other. The masculine activates and is completed by the feminine receives and shapes the masculine. Now, what would it look like if we were to try to understand the interaction of these two energies in a variety of different dimensions? Perhaps something like this. The chart you're looking at might not make much sense at first, but once explained should be pretty easy to navigate. Horizontally across the top you have the 5 categories representing a continuum between the extreme masculine and the extreme feminine. Masculine and feminine are the 2 energies, the balanced represents the ideal integration of both, whereas the extremes represent a failure of one energy to integrate with the other. Vertically, from top to bottom, you have 8 dimensions of human experience. The ordering was my best guess at most fundamental and primary to the human person to least, but I'm sure someone could argue for a better ordering or for the inclusion of other dimensions. Beginning at the top, we have the cosmological or mythological dimension. By cosmological, what I mean is something along the lines of, what do you see as the nature of the universe? How is the universe structured? How do you view yourself in relation to the universe? Camille Paglia, in her work Sexual Personae, is one of many who associate the masculine and feminine aspects of the human person with the dichotomy between the Apollonian and Dionysian drives. The Apollonian is associated with rationality, order, progress, and platonic relationships. The Dionysian impulse with mystery, nature, tradition, sexual relationships, and procreation. We can understand this distinction most clearly by comparing 2 different kinds of creation myths, one in which the world was created out of a war or battle among the gods, such as in Hesiod's account of the Greek creation story, the Norse Prose Edda, or the Babylonian Enuma Elish. These accounts represent a Dionysian or feminine cosmology. These stories are very similar in that they begin with a world in chaos, and from this chaos a god or goddess, or both, emerge. From the single god or goddess, or from the union of both, more gods emerge and a battle takes place among the gods. From this battle the world is created, often from the corpse of one of the defeated gods. This creation myth essentially conceives of the world as a result of sex and battle. Compare this to the creation narrative in the book of Genesis, or in the Gospel of John, or in the Egyptian, Memphite, and Theban narratives of creation. In these stories, the god is not created from the primeval chaos, but is external to it, and brings order into it, often through the logos, or use of language. In these stories, an entity separates the elements of the chaos into discrete entities to bring the creation of the world into motion. These represent the Apollonian or masculine cosmology. Creation is not the result of chaos, but of rationality ordering that chaos. This is the most fundamental level on which we see the distinction between the masculine and feminine energies of the world, and is the underpinning for the level immediately below it, the metaphysical level. This level represents your view of the relationship the metaphysical or supernatural world has to the physical world. In other words, Is the supernatural something apart from the natural or something that pervades it? The masculine energy is transcendental. God or the supernatural are something wholly apart from nature and inaccessible to it. The feminine is immanent. God or the supernatural operates within and pervades the natural. When these two energies are integrated, it results in a desirable incarnational metaphysics. The world order of a separation between God and nature are maintained, and yet the supernatural reveals itself and makes itself accessible to the natural. What happens if these two energies are not balanced? Well, if the masculine transcendentalism is not balanced by the feminine immanence, and nothing connects the supernatural sphere from the natural one, the two become untethered. Deism is a possible result. This is the view of a divine watchmaker. God creates the world and sets it in motion, but then abandons it. A more extreme result of this would be materialistic monism, which is the view that the material world is all there is. On the opposite side, if the feminine energy is not balanced by masculine recognition of the separateness of the natural and the supernatural, it can devolve into a kind of nature worship, where natural things are ascribed supernatural characteristics. How much do masculine and feminine energies have to do with one's metaphysical worldview? Of course, we can only guess, but think about this. Male atheists outnumber female atheists by an almost 2-to-1 ratio, whereas female neo-pagans outnumber male neo-pagans by almost the same 2-to-1 ratio. Speaking of men and women, that brings up to the third level, which is the physical. On the physical level, the gender energies are manifested in both living and non-living things. In living things, it's fairly easy to see them. Men are biological manifestations of masculine energy. Women are the biological manifestations of feminine energy. This is not to say men don't have feminine energy, or that women don't have masculine energy. I would argue we each have some of each. Men on average tend to be more masculine, whereas women on average tend to be more feminine. But it is possible to have a given man with more feminine energy than a given woman, and vice versa. What I'm talking about is that on the level of physicality, the energy that has manifested itself in an organism of given sex is the energy of that gender. Furthermore, different energies may be more dominant in a given person at different levels of human experience. A man has masculine energy manifesting at a physical level, but he could have feminine energy manifesting on the level of interpersonality or sexuality. This doesn't make him a woman trapped in a male body. It just means he's atypical for a man in that dimension. It doesn't make him less of a man. My guess is that manifestations of energies would be typically interrelated, so that if someone tends towards more masculine in one area, they would be more likely to do so in another, but it's not necessarily the case. I also think these gender energies manifest in non-living things, but that's a big topic, so I don't want to go too in-depth on it, and I haven't quite sorted out my thinking, but I point you to the aforementioned binary systems of mass and energy, magnets, and different types of construction as examples of what I'm driving at. After the physical, the next level is the intrapersonal. This might be called the level of the psyche. On this level, I drew from Jordan Peterson and through him Carl Jung. Before going into this, I want to emphasize, I am not a psychologist. What you are about to hear is someone with a background in philosophy and theology trying to integrate things he's heard psychologists say in a larger system of thought. So if there is someone with a psychological background who'd like to correct something I say here, I would appreciate it. The anima and animus are two archetypes of the human psyche. Now, as you can tell by the question marks, I was kind of uncertain about this level. On the one hand, it would make sense to say the anima is a manifestation of man's latent feminine energy, and the animus is a manifestation of a woman's latent masculine energy. This seems to be the position Jung and most Jungian psychologists take. But an alternative view might be that the anima is the masculine attempt at representing the woman, and the animus is the feminine attempt of representing a man. To understand what I mean by this, it might make sense to think about the bee orchid. The bee orchid is a flower that has employed an evolutionary reproductive strategy of physically looking like a female bee in order to attract male bees, who when they try to mate with the flower would transfer the pollen. Similarly, the anima might not be the result of feminine energy in a man, nor the animus masculine energy in a woman. Rather, it might be that the animi are each energy's best approximation of its opposite. This might explain why in young children these archetypes are underdeveloped, and as the children mature and interact with more people of the opposite sex, these archetypes are refined. Either way, the ideal is that the anima or animus is integrated with the rest of the psyche. The integrated psyche grants self-knowledge, self-confidence, and a capacity for empathy. On the other hand, a failure to integrate the animi might lead one to a lack of self-knowledge and confidence, and makes it difficult for one to relate to others. Also, I just want to clarify, the titles for the first and fifth column on the graph are extreme male and extreme female, but this doesn't mean that a man who exhibits extreme male traits is more masculine and a woman who exhibits extreme female traits is more feminine. These are not ideal categories. Rather, the extreme male is the manifestation of the masculine energy without its feminine counterpart, and vice versa. Think about it like skiing. Yes, most people have a dominant foot and so prefer one ski over the other, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a good skier, or even an average skier, knows how to use both skis with a certain level of proficiency. If you want to go down a mountain with only one ski, you're not going to have a good time. Similarly, if you try to go through life without developing one of your energies, it's generally going to be more difficult for you. The fifth dimension of human experience is sexual orientation. The masculine and feminine, being naturally drawn towards each other, are normatively heterosexual. This seems fairly obvious. What isn't so obvious is what happens when the sexual energies are not aligned. For the extreme male category, I turn to Alan Medinger's Growth into Manhood. In this book, Alan presents the following chart as exemplifying the typical steps a boy takes in growing in his maturation and development of his masculinity. Alan argues that the steps 4 and 5 of testing and affirmation takes place first in male-dominated spheres. The first is obviously the boy's father. A boy seeks affirmation from his father that he is a man just like him. Then it moves into the social sphere and peer group. Finally, it will move into the romantic sphere, where a man will look for affirmation from a woman that he is a man. If for some reason a young boy doesn't receive affirmation when he tries to test his manhood, he will eventually stop trying. He will not accept that he is in fact a man, and because of this, he will not develop an interest in women. This is because we desire our other, and the feminine is the other of the masculine. So if one has not accepted their masculinity, they won't accept their desire for the other of femininity. So what is the other for a man who hasn't accepted his masculinity? It would be his masculinity, which he will try to receive from others. Now this might not necessarily manifest itself as a same-sex attraction, but one can clearly see how this would be one way a man might fall into a same-sex attraction. Now what about women with same-sex attractions? Isn't their situation the same but in reverse with feminine energy as opposed to masculine energy? I don't think so, though I admit I could be wrong. I also think that female homosexuality is caused by a deficiency or lack of acceptance of her masculine qualities. This might come from a fear of the masculine, perhaps because of associations of the masculine with violence. In other words, men feel they are missing the masculine and so are attracted to it, and because they are attracted to men, they believe they are not attracted to women. Women come to dismiss men out of fear and hatred, and then assume that because they are not attracted to men, they must be attracted to women. So if that's what occurs when the masculine energy is out of order, what happens when the feminine energy is out of order? My guess is transsexualism, and this is the difference between the masculine and the feminine approach to solving problems. A man who feels deficiently masculine will change his sexual partner, making him a homosexual, whereas a woman who feels deficiently feminine will try to change herself, making her a transsexual. Now maybe I'm wrong about this and homosexuality is not inherently masculine and transsexualism is not inherently feminine. Maybe homosexuality and transsexualism ought to even be considered different dimensions of human experience. But it seems to me that there is something to the fact that male homosexuality has been recorded in virtually every culture, always and everywhere. In virtually every culture throughout history, there has always been a kind of male homosexual subculture. That is, except for those in which it was integrated into the main culture. Feminine homosexuality, though recorded in individuals, is nowhere near this endemic. The sixth dimension of human experience on the list is sexuality. Sexuality refers essentially to being in a relationship or being single, and in what way. Now, the masculine and feminine energies are naturally drawn to each other, and so the typical and normative state for a human being on this level is marriage. The masculine naturally desires the feminine and vice versa. I'm not going to get involved in the psychology of it, but there seems to be a fundamental link to bringing the anima or animus into relationship with the rest of the psyche and marriage. Now, after marriage, I also included celibacy as an option for the integration of the two energies. Celibacy is distinct from bachelorhood for reasons that will become apparent, but celibacy also represents an integration of the masculine and the feminine. A man or woman who chooses this path might find it more difficult because the integration of the energy opposite one's own gender still needs to occur without the advantage of physical intimacy with someone of the opposite sex, but it is still a possible fulfilling path. Given its difficulty, it's no wonder that it's most often taken successfully by religious figures who, because of their time in prayer and meditation, can be expected to have a higher level of self-integration. Now, what happens when integration of the energies does not occur is different for the different energies. When the masculine energy, for whatever reason, fails to integrate the feminine, it loses interest in it. When the feminine energy fails to integrate the masculine, it tries to overcompensate. Why does this difference occur? Well, remember that the masculine is the initiative energy, whereas feminine is the receptive energy. When the masculine energy is out of alignment, it ceases to call out for the feminine. When the feminine is out of alignment, it seeks out the masculine in a self-destructive manner in the hopes that the masculine can put it back into alignment. Think about it like a game of Marco Polo where the masculine calls out Marco and the feminine calls out Polo. The masculine Marco plays to catch the feminine Polo, while the feminine Polo plays the game to avoid being caught, although ultimately it does want to be caught. The Marco who loses sight of the object of the game will stop calling Marco, and the Polo who has lost sight of the object of the game will keep calling out Polo in order to attract attention. Similarly, when the masculine loses self-confidence, it will cease being interested in the feminine. When the feminine loses self-confidence, it will desperately seek out the masculine for her own self-validation. The seventh dimension is the interpersonal. This is the one that a lot of psychological research has already been done upon. The book I read was The Essential Difference by Simon Baron-Cohen. He and his team developed what has been called the empathizing systemizing theory, or ES theory. Essentially, there is an empathizing dimension and a systemizing dimension. Females on average score higher on measures of empathy, and males on average score higher on measures of systematizing. It should be noted that his research is much more complex than what I'm making it out to be here. According to him, there are other biological factors than sex involved, but it's not too much of a simplification to say that his research found that males tend to have brains that emphasize systematizing, whereas females tend to have brains that emphasize empathy, though there are exceptions. Another interesting avenue of his research has been into extreme male brains. That is, while most males and some females have systematizing at a significantly higher level than empathizing, there are some people, mostly male, by an almost 5-to-1 ratio, who have an extremely high level of systematizing with a below average level of empathizing. These people have what we refer to as autism. Now, if that's what the extreme male brain looks like, what does an extreme female brain look like? What do we call someone who has an extremely high empathizing but a below average systematizing level? Well, a couple different ones have been posited, including depression, psychosis, and borderline personality disorder. In all of these, women outnumber men, and in the last of these, they do so by a 3-to-1 ratio. Now, why is this particularly interesting? Well, if you remember the first level, the cosmological, how do the masculine and feminine manifest? The masculine manifested it in a mythos about a god creating the world by instilling order or systematizing the chaos. The feminine manifested in a mythos about a number of gods creating the world through their relationships, positive and negative. So the interpersonal level finds a direct correspondence to the cosmological. The eighth level is the ethical. Now, the terms I used for the masculine and feminine impulse here, deontological ethics and consequential ethics, might not fully capture what I mean, but they were the best ones I could come up with. Essentially, the masculine impulse when understanding what the right thing to do is to focus on the means, whereas the feminine impulse is to focus on the results. This, along with many things I've said before, might help explain why means-oriented systems like capitalism and laissez-faire economics tend to appeal to men, while ends-oriented systems like socialism find large support in the feminist community. The ideal integration of the masculine and feminine on this level isn't any single ideology, as I think integrated individuals can be of many different kinds of political persuasions, but rather a kind of synthesis that we might call justice and mercy. An integrated person recognizes the need for fair laws, and they recognize that these laws should be ordered towards the good of the individual those laws are meant to serve. What are the extremes? I would venture that the masculine extreme would be a kind of proceduralism, that is, an emphasis on following the law just for the sake of it being the law. It's the kind of myopic worldview that certain people committed to a given ethical worldview tend to display. For example, Peter Singer is a pretty well-known Australian ethicist who has passionately argued for utilitarianism. As a utilitarian, he has argued that since he believes adult pigs to be more capable of pain and pleasure than a human baby, the life of the pig is more valuable than that of the human infant. Now, if you accept his philosophy that pain or pleasure are the only measures of value, his point makes sense. But when an ethical rule leads a person to such an absurd conclusion, that is evidence that the philosophy itself is flawed. But Peter Singer bites the bullet and accepts the rule for the sake of the rule. That is what I mean by proceduralism. On the opposite side, the extreme feminine would be emotionalism, that is, discarding any logic or consistent ethical rule in order to achieve a result that feels right. This is most evident in feminist rhetoric, and really the whole SJW movement in general. Consider diversity and appropriation, or internalized misogyny versus listen and believe, and ally and white knight. These terms and what they refer to necessarily conflict, and yet feminists accept the cognitive dissonance and hold to them simultaneously. This is because feminists are generally not interested in creating a coherent worldview. They are more interested in using ethics as an emotional reaction to emotional stressors. Now, these might not be the only levels. For example, one could imagine a cultural level spanning from revolutionary to reactionary, or a political level spanning from tyranny to anarchy, but I think that is research for a future video. Hopefully, with these 8 levels, I've already made the points I wanted to make. First, the universal categories of masculine and feminine seem to exist on more levels of human experience than just the physical. Second, masculinity and femininity are different, complementary, and ordered toward each other. Third, integration of the masculine and feminine impulse is necessary for every human being, though how they are integrated might be different for different people. Finally, a variety of social phenomena, such as the confluence of masculinity, atheism, and autism, or feminism, emotionalism, and confused sexuality, can be explained by failure to integrate one or both sexual energies into one's personality. If you liked this video and would like to see more, please like and subscribe. If you would like me to make videos full-time and increase the quality of my videos, please donate to my Patreon. And whatever you thought of my video, please comment below. Also, feel free to suggest topics that you would like to hear me cover. Until next time, I'm Benedict the 17th. Go with God.